Coming up on National Talk Like a Pirate Day, Blue Origin announcements.
NASA belays, matey.
And Virgin Galactic has a more powerful cannon for their LauncherOne.
Plus, we're going to be talking about the Space Launch System, where it came from, and where it's be going. Stay tuned. Tomorrow begins right now. And welcome to tomorrow, episode 8.27 for Saturday, September 19th, 2015. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann Higginbotham, and we'll be your hosts for this episode. Before we get started, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of the premier members of tomorrow. These are the people who've contributed $10 or more to this specific episode. We are a crowdfunded show. Every single dollar helps. Now, you don't have to contribute $10. That's a lot of money, and we really thank the premier members for doing that. And they get the largest number of rewards because of it. But if you want to contribute as little as 1 penny, you can do that. For more information on how to help crowdfund the show, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. The reason I like Patreon is that you contribute what you think the show is worth. So if you think it's worth 1 penny per episode, then that's what you contribute. If you think it's worth $1 per episode, contribute that. Whatever you're comfortable with, contribute that. And then for whatever dollar value you put in, we give you something in return. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and get started with some space news. First up, we have a Proton launch with AM-8 communication satellite. Here's some footage. I promise there will be audio. And then just a bunch more rocket noise. That launched on Monday, September 14th at 1900 Coordinated Universal Time. That launched out of Complex 81 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Like I said, that was the ExpressSat AM-8 satellite, which is going to a geostationary orbit or a fixed point over the Earth, so it's always going to be above the same spot over Earth at all times. The deployment of the satellite, the Express AM-8, occurred at 1:37 Coordinated Universal Time the next day, so several hours later. ExpressSat AM-8 will replace the aging Express A4 communication satellite, which was launched in June 2002. This particular satellite has an expected shelf life of approximately 15 years. It's going to be providing commercial telecom services and communications for the Russian government, prime minister, and president. This was the 5th launch of the Proton rocket this year and the 406th launch of Proton since its debut in what year? 1965. That's right. Absolutely. How awesome is that? All right. Speaking of launches, China also launched some stuff. It was kind of a surprise and kind of not, right? So our launch librarians are amazing,
yes,
and actually knew in advance that this was happening. But like no one else had this on their calendars. So what did they do?
Stuff.
All right. Moving on.
I know. So. Okay, so there's this launch by China, and typical of China, they don't say a whole lot. And this particular one really hardly said anything. So, yes?
We have footage.
We do?
We have I know,
Nice.
It's weird.
Wait, do we send a librarian out there?
We should have sent a launch librarian out there to check this out.
All right.
Okay, you get like 5 seconds of it, but
Yeah, oh, that's kind of pretty. That's going to cause some smoke damage on the...
that's about all you get.
All right. Well, that was neat. So this one's from the Xichang Space Center in southwest China's Sichuan province, at 15:42 UTC or 11:42 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Saturday. This was a Long March 3B with 4 strap-on liquid-fueled boosters, as you can see. Boosters. And the U.S. military tracking data says that this rocket's payload was put into a geostationary transfer orbit. And that's all I have. Literally, no other information about the spacecraft was released by China, including a name. So we're guessing it's an intelligence gathering satellite.
With boosters.
Boosters. My Minnesotan came out. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say. You're right. Sorry.
But they did more.
They did more. Well, because that was in the southwestern part of China, and
Sure.
then over to the northwestern part of China, there was a GQuan from the GQuan launch base. I can't speak, out of the Gobi Desert.
Booster.
It's all your fault of the northwest China. I know we have footage of this one.
Just go to the footage.
I hate you so much.
You get like 5 seconds of this one too.
Perfect. This was a 2-stage Long March 2D booster. This is a Gaofen 9 remote sensing satellite, a civilian-operated asset designed to collect imagery of Earth with a resolution better than 1 meter or 3.3 feet. This was Gobi Desert at northwest China and aught 4:42 UTC or 12:42 Eastern Daylight Time on Monday.
And joining us now behind us, we've got Space Mike. Hi, Space Mike.
Hello.
And why don't you tell us a little bit? Hi. Tell us a little bit.
Segue.
So we talked last week about Boeing and United Launch Alliance getting potentially purchased for $2 billion by Aerojet Rocketdyne. Yeah, tell us more about. We got more information. Tell us more.
So as of this Wednesday, Boeing has officially stated that they are rejecting that bid and they will not sell United Launch Alliance to Aerojet Rocketdyne. The whole plan behind this is so that Aerojet Rocketdyne can use its potentially new AR-1 engine to replace the RD-180 engines on the Atlas V and potentially the new Vulcan rocket. So since Boeing and especially United Launch Alliance prefers the Blue Origin engine, the BE-4 engine, there is a lot of reasons why Boeing wants to continue with this partnership and not lose a lot of the different control and the different plans that they have for this. However, something that I think is interesting about this is the Atlas V rocket is going to be retired in a few years, and of course being replaced by the Vulcan rocket. And Aerojet Rocketdyne in the past has tried to seek out the rights to manufacture the Atlas V rocket themselves. I'm hoping that some sort of deal can be reached between Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Aerojet Rocketdyne to at least give Aerojet the rights to build Atlas V and continue launching it in the future with their new AR-1 engine, as well as United Launch Alliance doing the Vulcan rocket in the future. So there's no sort of talks with that, but that's just me being optimistic as to hopefully some more talks can be reached. But as of right now, since Boeing is officially saying no, we're not taking this deal, and the company is worth a lot more than that anyway, that is the status of this right now. So no deals, no sells are going to be going on right now. And as for that, though, regarding the whole United Launch Alliance wanting to go with Blue Origin, they have recently announced a lot of new stuff about what their plans are in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and pass that back to you, Ben, and find out a little bit more information about that.
Always the king of segues, Mike. Awesome. Thank you so much. Speaking of, absolutely, on Tuesday, September 15th, Blue Origin had this to say.
Our new home here on the Space Coast is anchored right here at Launch Complex 36. During its 43 years of service, there were 145 launches that thundered into space from here. And one of the unique things about what we're going to do here in Florida, we're not just launching from here, we're building here. At Exploration Park, we'll have a 21st century production facility where we'll focus on manufacturing our reusable fleet of orbital launchers and readying them for flight again and again. Locating the vehicle assembly near our launch site makes it way easier to process and transport really big rockets. We'll be launching from here later this decade, and you'll hear us before you'll see us, because our American-made BE-4 engine, power behind our orbital launch vehicle, will be acceptance tested here.
So there you go. That was Jeff Bezos. He is the founder of Amazon as well as Blue Origin. Now, Blue Origin's been kind of a secretive company doing things in the Mojave. Oh no, they're in Texas. They're in Texas. Sorry. Doing things in Texas, and they kind of fly their New Shepard spacecraft, and everyone will be like, "Oh, that happened."
Right.
And now they seem to be kind of coming out of development mode, or at least secretive mode, and really hitting the ground running with all of these really great things. As Jeff Bezos mentioned, Space Launch Complex 36 boosters. I got it too. You gave it to me.
Sorry.
Space Launch Complex 36, also known as Slick 36, is where they're going to be launching from. They're also adding an Exploration Park, which is just outside the gates of Kennedy Space Center, their vehicle manufacturing facility. So it's a little bit different than other providers, right? Like United Launch Alliance, they're all over the country with Boeing and Lockheed. They build it all over the place and kind of all funnels down to the launch site where they do the final assembly. SpaceX builds in Hawthorne, California, and then ships it to the launch site. So this will be kind of unique in the idea that they're building it and flying it basically all right there. That's kind of cool. They're going to be investing $200 million in new facilities at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, or Cape Canaveral, excuse me, and it's going to bring about 330 jobs or so to the region. So yeah, it's going to be really cool. Now, there are a couple other things that they mentioned, but you didn't hear in that little soundbite. Is initial flights are going to be robotic only, so robots and satellites only. However, the intent of Blue Origin is to fly humans. So they're going to kind of prove out the technology with robots and non-humans, make sure it works, and then eventually they'll start flying humans. And they want to do that all later this decade, or at the very least start the robots later this decade. Nice. So on a really good trajectory moving forward. So speaking of trajectories moving forward, let's, oh, wait, no, I got it. No, Mike. No, you gave me a hands off. So now I'm gonna toss back to you. What was your segue gonna be?
Just one thing, interesting thing I wanted to note about Blue Origin is with this orbital rocket that they have announced, the first stage, of course, will be powered by the BE-4 engine, but the upper stage for that is essentially the New Shepard vehicle that they have been testing and that they're going to be offering the suborbital tourist rides on, and that's using the BE-2 and BE-3 engines. So, it's really interesting that they have, been doing this in such a way that once they have that, the core stage of their orbital rocket ready, the rest of it might be ready to go, and they might be a lot closer to doing this than all of us think. So. Just an interesting thought.
I totally agree. I think they are much further along than any of us ever really gave them credit for. But that's because we simply didn't have the information, right? I mean, they would kind of fly, and then we, a while later, learn that they had flown, and we didn't really have a good, clear picture as to what was going on. But now that that picture's coming to light, you go, oh, well, they're way further along than I thought. But they still take some time to actually make stuff happen. So, all right. Speaking of taking things.
Longer than they should?
Longer than they should. We'll sit here in awkward silence for a moment.
Okay.
Talk to us about some NASA delays.
Yeah, so NASA made an announcement earlier this week saying that the Orion deep spacecraft manned vehicle, crew module, that's the word I want, and the first flight with Space Launch System that incorporates the Orion Space Crew Launch Vehicle was going to slip from 2021 to no later than April of 2023.
Yikes. That's a bit of a delay. Now, to be clear, though, that's the crewed version.
Yeah, the crewed version.
Yep.
The one with crew, not crude, C-R-U-D-E. So I just want to be really.
I didn't even catch that. That's hilarious.
Really clear about that.
I don't want to say manned mission because I hate the
right.
So
yeah, the human-rated version.
Yeah.
No. So they are quoted as saying that they've just gone through a rigorous technical and programmatic review. Not problematic. The financial and engineering challenges that can make the 2-year slip probable, although it's not necessarily a certainty. NASA expects to spend more than $17 billion to develop Orion, which can support a crew of up to 4 astronauts for up to 21 days. And that comes to an addition of the some $4.7 billion already spent on the design and other work on the capsule, for which Lockheed Martin Corp is the lead contractor. That was back in the Ares days, that sort of thing. An additional $7 billion has been earmarked for development for the new heavy lift rocket, the Space Launch System, potentially raw material shortages and manufacturing hurdles on top of the unforeseen problems is what has been pointed to for these sorts of issues. Bill Gerstenmaier, the agency top manned spaceflight official, says NASA hopes to fly manned or crewed explorations missions roughly once a year once they get this sorted out, which is just sort of depressing to me
Well,
in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, we talked about shuttle not flying
I
fast.
said, yeah, well, I
with
mean,
a
could
high
you
enough-
imagine if shuttle was only once a year, if the shuttle missions were only once a year, and what, yeah, this whole thing, it sucks, and it's not putting on a really great face for NASA in general, as the longer it delays that that NASA's flying crew, the longer and harder it's going to be for anyone to want to support it, if that makes any sense.
That does, but it's not necessarily all NASA's fault. I mean,
No, it's not.
It's kind of there's a lot of politics behind all this, and a lot of money flow, and there's a lot of weird string pulling and whatnot. So, all right, there you go. All right, let's go ahead and bring Space Mike back in to talk about some Virgin Galactic news.
That's right. There's some new news regarding the LauncherOne development. And LauncherOne is a project that Virgin Galactic has to have an unmanned rocket that would take the place of the Spaceship Two vehicle. Right now, we're currently watching the video of the old version of LauncherOne when they first announced it. The new news is that they have actually upgraded the LauncherOne vehicle and have made it so that it's going to be capable of delivering small satellites somewhere in the 200 kilogram range to sun-synchronous orbits. That's an orbit that is slightly inclined so that as a satellite revolves around the Earth, it is always in the light of the sun and its solar panels can always remain charged and they can remain in contact with it. However, if they want to send something smaller like CubeSats, several CubeSats or a small satellite, they can deliver up to 400 kilograms into low Earth orbits. So that is really interesting. They still have a lot of testing to do, but the LauncherOne engine that they were going to be using, it looks like is being shelved. And they are proceeding forward with a stronger liquid-fueled engine that they're testing at their new facility that they recently opened up. But with this, since the rocket is going to be larger, more powerful, the White Knight 2 might not be capable of actually delivering this to the altitudes that they want to do before they release it and launch it. So Virgin Galactic has been looking at different aircraft that would be a larger aircraft to launch the LauncherOne vehicle from. And it's kind of interesting that this is kind of taking the same path as Orbital ATK's Pegasus rocket and is being launched from the Stargazer Lockheed 1011 aircraft. And that's really interesting to me that they might get something in the same class that would release it from underneath it. Something that would only need modifications instead of building a new aircraft from scratch to be a mother carrier plane. So these are some really interesting developments with Virgin Galactic, and we're just going to have to wait and see as more test information starts to become available. Unlike the hybrid rocket engines, there is a lot of publicly available information on these liquid-fueled rockets as the progression is taking place. And their whole reasoning for retiring the first version of the engine that they're going to be is simply that that was a test engine, and to figure out exactly the qualifications and how much thrust and delta V they would need out of that engine in order to pull this off. So this is some interesting news from Virgin Galactic, and it seems like, at least at the facilities there, that there is a little bit more safety and a little bit more red tape that they have to go through to do this safely. So very interesting, and I'm looking forward to a lot more of this as it comes through, and I hope that they can pull this off. So very cool news from Virgin Galactic.
Great, thank you, Mike. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to bring Mike back, and we're going to be talking about the history of the Space Launch System and kind of where it's going to be going from there. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Tomorrow. Now, before we get started with our main topic for today, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of Tomorrow who've helped make this specific segment of this episode happen. These are the people who've contributed $5 or more to this episode. You can find out more information on how you can help crowdfund the shows of Tomorrow over at patreon.com/TMRO. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our main topic, which is the history of the Space Launch System, which actually goes back quite a ways. Let's go, boo, there we go. That's my magic power. That's my only magic power, is to bring Mike back into the show. And even I don't do that. That's actually Dutta hitting a button in the control room. The Space Launch System doesn't start as the Space Launch System. It starts as something much, much earlier than that, called Constellation. So Mike, you want to give us a quick run through of the history of how all of this kind of began?
Sure. Well, from my perspective, there was a need to replace the shuttle, and there were several different ambitious ideas and plans to replace it. But unfortunately, a lot of these programs, which a lot of money was spent on, were canceled, usually when an administration changed or for just going over budget and financial reasons and all sorts of problems, while NASA was still trying to operate the shuttle and build the International Space Station. So there was a need to replace it with something, but a lot of these ambitious goals were proving to not be workable and not being able to do something like a single stage to orbit space plane. So, with the Constellation program, this was a program that was initiated by George W. Bush in 2005, and it ran from 2005 to 2009. And with it, it was going to be able to use components that the space shuttle were already using, upgrade them, and return it to a sort of capsule, a human capsule that would be able to mirror the Saturn V development and to mirror the old style of rockets that we were doing back in the 60s. And with this, it was supposed to be a program to return humans to the moon and have even more larger landers and have ambitious plans to start building a moon base and eventually to go forward and go to Mars. And that whole path would be, you know, Earth orbit, moon, and then Mars. And with this program, there was a lot of money that was spent on all this existing hardware of making all these different upgrades to make it. But the Space Launch System started off in this plan as the Ares 5 rocket. This would use the large external tank that the space shuttle had, but instead of having the 3 RS-25 engines that are on the back of the space shuttle, have 4 to 5 of them on the bottom of that external tank, and remove the space shuttle entirely and have an upper stage and payload above all of that. You know, a lot of you guys, of course, know what the basic shape of the Space Launch System is. But there was also another version, the Ares 1, which was just one of the single white solid rocket boosters with an upper stage and the Orion capsule on top of that. And so much money was being funneled into this program, and so many cost overruns and problems that they were running into popped up, that a commission got started, the Augustine Commission, which, you know, their results were just that there's too much money being spent on this, this is unsustainable, and it's going to be way more expensive to operate these vehicles and rockets than, you know, we initially thought. And with that, the coming in administration, the Obama administration, which came in 2008, finally decided to cancel the program, and there wasn't a really clear path from there. You know, the only thing that Obama said when they canceled the Constellation program was that they wanted to shift the focus to going to a near-Earth asteroid and protecting us from near-Earth asteroids. And so there was this whole limbo and all this work and all this money that was already spent. Carrie Ann talked about some of those figures on the Orion capsule already. And it kind of became up to Congress to decide what NASA should do next, since the plan that the presidential administration put forward wasn't very clear. You know, Mars was still the goal, but there wasn't a path to go there. The Constellation program at least had a clearer path. The whole near-Earth asteroid program wasn't even a program until recently, when it became the Asteroid Redirect Mission, or NASA ARM. So with this, the Senate and Congress pretty much came up with the requirements of what they would need for this rocket, which just so happened to be exactly what the Ares 5 program was. And of course, senators from the states where the Ares 5 rocket was being manufactured, of course, were very vocal as to what the requirements for this next large rocket in order to get to Mars would be. And that's kind of where we're at as to why these requirements came up and why NASA is building this rocket that they don't necessarily want to build. Yes, they see and want the need for a heavy lift rocket, but maybe just not in this particular way, with all these cost plus contracts and all these encouragements to delay the program, to stretch out the whole jobs program and profits that are made from doing this. And so there's a really kind of weird situation there that I'm not sure how would be fixed, but that's where we're at with where the Space Launch System came from, and the Orion follows a very similar path.
Now, going back, I remember it may have been about 5, 6 years ago. Constellation was kind of just spinning up, and inside of Constellation is an entire program, and inside of Constellation you had the Ares 1 rocket, you had the Ares 5 rocket, you had the what was the lander called? It was the
Altair.
the
right?
Altair lander.
I think it was the Altair.
Yep. So you had all of
And
these.
of course, Orion.
Yeah, you had all these different things, and Ares 1 is what they were working on first, and it was basically a solid. They took one of the solid rocket boosters off the side of the space shuttle. They kind of extended it by a section and then stuck humans on top, which is a terrible idea. Solid fuel. The problem, for those who don't know, solid fuel, once you start it, you can't stop it. And once you cook the formula in, you can't throttle it either. Now, you can throttle up and down if you bake it that way. Like, if you cook the... because you're making it's solid fuel, so you basically cook it. So if you cook it and say, okay, at this time I want you to throttle down, at this time I want you to throttle back up, then you can do those things.
It's sort of like a candle. So if you have a wider spot or if you have a thinner spot, it'll burn at a different rate.
Exactly. That's a great way to describe that. Yeah.
Part of the fuel grains were shaped differently in order to be able to do that on shuttle, and they can manipulate the throttle profile accordingly.
Says the magic voice of Dada.
Yes.
So so that was the Ares 1, and no one really understood the point of the Ares 1 because we could already do what Ares 1 was doing with pretty much all of the rockets on the market at that time, except that all of the other rockets would have been far less expensive and way safer. So it was this weird, like, we're going to build Ares 1, and no one agreed with Ares 1. But Ares 5 made a ton of sense, and Ares 5 was a heavy lift rocket that was capable of essentially sending humans back to the moon. But we got stuck in this whole like developing Ares 1 thing, and Ares 5 never came to be, and that got translated over to the Space Launch System. But in between that, there was this group of people that wanted to do something a little bit different. And was it Shuttle C or not Shuttle C? Do you remember its name? Shuttle Direct?
There was Shuttle C, and then there was Jupiter Direct.
Jupiter Direct. That's actually somewhat close to what Ares 5. Jupiter Direct basically took all the unsafe parts of the space shuttle. So you had you had the space shuttle sitting on the side of the external tank, so all this debris would slam down to the space shuttle. So it's actually a very, very bad and unsafe way to do it. So if you move the shuttle, if you move the crew to the top of the vehicle as it's ascending through the atmosphere, you get rid of that risk point. And that's essentially what they did in Jupiter Direct, is they said, okay, let's take these engines, let's drop them underneath, and let's take all this existing shuttle technology, put it up top. But the key problem with all of these is that they use existing shuttle technology. Remember, the shuttle was designed in the 60s and the very early 70s. I'm sorry, the late 60s. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It was
Late
designed,
60s, early 70s.
Late 60s, early 70s is when it was designed, and it was built in the late 70s and early 80s. So essentially, we're taking 60s and 70s technology in the year what was that? Like the year 2010, 2005, somewhere in there.
2005 when they wanted to start.
We're taking 60s and 70s technology and calling it cost effective to reuse it. When in reality, if we take modern manufacturing techniques and do a clean sheet of paper and say, you know what? No, we're going to start from scratch. We're going to do all this brand new. You could actually end up with a much more cost-effective rocket, which is what we're seeing in the commercial space industry. They're not using legacy shuttle technology. You're not doing anything else. And so you're seeing these very fast to develop and very efficient and very cost-effective vehicles being built. So there's all of that history. There was this huge debate, all this politics. What rocket do we go with? How do we design this stuff? Where are we going to go? We're going to try to build the Ares 1. They actually did fly the Ares 1X, which was a pure marketing stunt because it wasn't an Ares 1. It wasn't the extended solid rocket booster. It was the regular solid rocket booster off of the shuttle. It didn't even
with
use
no upper stage.
with no upper stage. It was just dumb. And, it didn't use the avionics from the Ares 1. It was avionics from a Delta 4, Delta 2, something like that.
I think so. I can't remember.
It was like this hobbled together thing from parts from other rockets that wasn't actually the thing that they were going to be flying. They said, look, it will work. And everyone went okay, why did we do this? But anyhow, so all of that happened. The Augustine Commission came in. They said, this is insane. Why are we doing all of this? And so from that, it kind of came down to look, you shouldn't be sending your crew and your cargo up on the same vehicle. That doesn't mean that you need two different vehicles, which is kind of how Ares 1 and Ares 5 were built. It was just the one capsule should either send humans or it should send cargo, but you shouldn't try to do both like you did with the shuttle. And here are some ways to make this whole thing safer. And here's some ways, it's over budget. Here's some ways to reduce that budget. And so kind of from all of this, the Space Launch System was born. And there are a lot of space geeks who like the Space Launch System. There are a lot of space geeks who don't like the Space Launch System. But in the end, it will fly. It will, I believe, in my opinion.
At least once.
At least once, yeah. The engines will ignite on the pad and commit to space. Right? That will happen at least once. Now, what happens beyond that's a little bit up in the air because it's so expensive. Do you remember how much it is to fly, Mike? It's like $1 billion plus.
It's in the it's in the billions.
It's almost as much as it costs to launch the space shuttle, which near the end was getting about $2 billion per launch. It's going to cost at least that much, if not more, because the flights are going to be so infrequent. If the flights were going to be more frequent, then it would actually be a little bit cheaper. But
so the hope to fly it maybe once a year.
That might not even happen. They're even in that same report that you talked about, Carrie Ann, they're even talking about how they might only be able to launch it twice a year with the current plan that things are going. And that whole J2X engine that they finished development on, they might not even start using that until the late 2030s now. So, it's crazy. Like, even the J2X engine, which is a good idea and something we needed, there's another, wasted money if we're not actually going to be using it. We're going to be using the RL-10 engines, the engines that are on Centaurs. So,
Take it with a grain of salt because it's on Wikipedia, but cost per launch is $500 million to $5 billion.
That's a huge range.
It is.
So, all right, how do we fix this then, right? Well, not us, because it needs to be, but what would make Space Launch System, because if you take a step back and you just look at what Space Launch System can do, specifically kind of the later stuff that has really heavy launch capabilities into space, it would really enable a lot of things to happen in space. It could enable us to go back to the moon. It could enable us to go to Mars. It could enable a lot of really, really great things. So the rocket itself isn't bad. It's the politics around all of it that I think everyone kind of has a hard time with, and some of the reasoning behind making some of those decisions. But having a rocket like that is a good thing. So how do we make a rocket like that, which I think we would all agree the rocket itself would be a good thing. A super heavy lift rocket's a good thing. How do we make that something that we could stand behind and be excited about?
Take Congress out of it?
I wish.
Seriously, if you take the politics of where the parts are going to be made, where they're going to be assembled, or you're trying to do something.
I was just going to do that, yeah. Buttons, no.
That's a good one. I mean,
Other
that's
buttons.
Good covering shot.
The other D, sorry.
There we go. All right, yeah, go ahead.
If you take the politics out of where the parts need to be made and who's supposed to supply them and whose jurisdiction we're serving with more jobs and a money influx and tax incomes and tax revenues and things like that, and you take all of that out of the space program, you give NASA, hey, this is what we need you to do, and this is the deadline that you have to do it, and this is the money that you have to do it with. Let them figure it out, and they will, just like we did in the Apollo era. Yeah, we spent a buttload of money, and all we did was, all they were trying to do was accomplish this goal of landing a man safely on the moon, or landing a man on the moon and returning safely to the Earth before the decade was out. He was given they were given an objective, a directive. This is what you need to do, and a pile of money. Go do it. And they selected all of the people that needed to do it, and they selected all the companies that needed to supply that. And those companies had subcontractors, and that's fine. But Congress didn't say, well, you need to use shuttle engines, you need to use shuttle boosters, you need to use shuttle tanks, and you need to... Well, why did we cancel shuttle then? Because all these parts are still shuttle. You take Congress out of the mandate and just, here's your money, here's what you need to go do, and go do it.
Mm-hmm. So
/ soapbox.
But and that would actually be very cool if they kind of had that Apollo. But Apollo was a once in a ever kind of thing, right? Just the Cold War, everything surrounding Apollo, we're not going to get that political climate again. So are we really going to be able to get back to that? Because it is, I mean, NASA's kind of become a jobs program, and we say that, and it's not very good, but NASA's still very effective with the money that they do have, right? I mean, they're still doing amazing things. It's just that you've got this, like, almost all of NASA is awesome, and then you've got Space Launch System.
That's because they're mandated to do what Congress tells them to do and how to do it. The laws the laws are written to say that you have to use these parts, you have to use these suppliers, you have to do it this way. And if you take that out, then all of NASA would be awesome again, and they would get stuff done.
So what's the path forward for Space Launch System then, in your guys' opinion, right? So are we going to just, I'm of the opinion it launches once, then it gets scrapped by the next president. What do you guys think?
I think that that is a very real possibility, but I feel like what needs to happen somehow is there needs to be a culture established where, like in the 60s, instead of it being, I mean, yes, it was a jobs program. They picked to build a lot of the manufacturing facilities in the South to employ a lot of the unemployed there. I mean, it was a genius move on James Webb. And even though it was a jobs program, there was this whole culture and atmosphere that existed to be innovative. You're not mandated to use this particular parts from this particular contractor, and you have to get all your metals and so from this provider, supplier. You know, there wasn't anything like that. It was like, we are contracting all of you to be as innovative as possible and to do this the best way possible, not necessarily cheap. You know, money wasn't even an issue, but to do this as innovatively as possible and safely as possible so that we can do that goal of bringing the human back alive and just doing the whole thing. So there was this whole atmosphere of doing that. And the whole deadline, was, that was a big motivator as well. And I think that JFK being assassinated really put it into people's hearts, that we need to do this. It's JFK's legacy, and I don't think that will ever be reproduced. But I think that spirit of let's be innovative and let's do this in an amazing way. The whole thing with Jupiter Direct, which became Ares 5, which became Space Launch System, is, hey, we have all of these extra parts lying around that we could easily assemble and launch in 9 months. That was the whole plan with this.
That's not happening.
And
How's that going?
It could happen. It could happen. If they wanted to, they could do that. They could be launching the first space launch system by next year. I think that is sort of the plan, but again, it keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. I think now it might be 2017 for the first launch. So they could do it if they wanted to. The parts exist. They have at least 3 external tanks that are in various phases of being ready to fly and being able to integrate the RS-25 engines. There have been all these tests. They could do it really soon if they wanted to.
Let me
and
use your
manufacturing.
Own logic. Now, let me use your own logic against you, though. You want them to be innovative, right? Mm-hmm. Rockets aren't innovative. Rockets are well known. They're well defined. You got multiple companies that are doing this. If you want them to be innovative, as Hans said in the chat room, why aren't they doing things like artificial gravity on the International Space Station? Right? They could get a right. They could get a what am I trying to say? I'm thinking circumferential.
Centrifuge.
The centrifuge.
You could get a centrifuge going up on the internet. What a perfect testing platform for artificial gravity on the International Space Station. That would be innovative. That would be really incredible. And in fact, the International Space Station was supposed to have that, and it got removed.
There was one that was already built. It was already built, and it was being prepped for launch, and then they scrapped it. It's currently sitting outside of the Japanese Space Center and just collecting rust. But they built it. It was getting ready to fly, and they tested it out. It worked.
Isn't that what NASA should be doing then, instead of building Space Launch System? Is Space Launch System actually innovative, or is it? I mean, it doesn't feel like rockets are where NASA should be innovating.
Space Launch System should have cost, $2 billion to do. Why has it already cost over $12 billion since 2005 to do this plan?
Because we keep changing course.
But the course hasn't changed very much. Yes, we might have changed course as to which destination to go to, but that doesn't necessarily change any of the particular design of the rocket. Sure, there might have been a lot of different changes and stuff with the upper stage, but at least the core stage development could progress. And instead they kept putting things on hold, for like 1.5 years. But meanwhile, they still had to keep their employees employed and still doing something towards it. So, it's just a big mess. Sorry, I'm getting upset. I need to calm down.
You're passionate. No, you're passionate. Passion's allowed. We're all excited about the prospects of humans exploring the solar system, right? I know I am. I'm not going to speak for you guys, but you guys are too. So I just spoke for you guys. And so when you see things like this, you want them to be better than they are. And we look at NASA as that organization that sent humans to the moon, right? If any organization ever could do innovative and awesome things, it is NASA. And I don't think any of us are actually blaming NASA. I think a lot of us in the space industry say, oh, blah, 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 NASA, blah, 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 NASA, blah, 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 NASA. But what we really mean is blah, 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 Congress, blah, 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 Congress, blah, 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 Congress. Because if the engineers were allowed to do whatever they wanted to do, I don't think we'd end up with what we have right now.
And that's the thing, when they are allowed to do whatever they want to do, they're really innovative projects. At least half of NASA's budget every year is spent wisely, and they do really cool, really innovative things. I mean, just look at all of the small satellites that have been launched in just the past 10 years that have done some really amazing things. You know, New Horizons was one of those. You know, Dawn was one of those, getting all the stuff from Vesta and Ceres. You know, a lot of really good missions and a lot of really cool ideas that were done cheaply and innovatively, because they were allowed to do whatever they want. They had this broad mission statement, and they accomplished it really cheaply because they only had so much to work with. So they are capable of doing it. Doing things innovatively.
JPL was given money to make Mir A and B. A 9-month-long mission, and Opportunity is still working 10 years later.
Good point. Good
Mic
point.
drop. As Kitty in the cat room said, being semi-new to all this space
Kitty
and
in the what room?
Kitty in the cat room.
in the cat room. Yeah, Kitty in the cat room.
Just checking. Boosters.
Boosters.
Welcome to tomorrow.
We'll repronounce things the way we want.
I'm quite frustrated with the fact that all I keep hearing is that things are able to be flying, but everyone keeps putting
them
things
on
on hold. Arg. Yeah. You know, space is very hard from an engineering standpoint, but even harder from a political one. So, all right, that's our main topic. That's a little bit of the history of the Space Launch System. It started as Constellation, and then it kind of morphed into Jupiter Direct, and then it kind of morphed into it kept morphing and morphing and morphing until what we have today. And whether you love it or hate it, we'd love to know your comments. What do you think of the Space Launch System? Do you think it will fly once, let alone more often than once? Do you think it will fly on Exploration Mission 1, which is that's an Apollo 8 style slingshot around the moon without humans, correct? EM1?
Mm-hmm.
Exploration Mission 1, they're calling it EM1.
Yeah.
Goes around the moon, no humans, all Apollo 8 style. That's what Apollo 8 did. Then Exploration Mission number 2, which you talked about, is the one that just got pushed back to 2023. That one has humans on board. Yep. But I mean, this would be the exciting thing about this mission. If EM2, Exploration Mission number 2, ever does fly, that will be the first time. That will be the furthest humans have been out away from our planet since Apollo. And I believe that mission goes further out than even Apollo did, does it not?
Well, actually, Exploration Mission 2 is actually the same flight profile as Exploration Mission 1, the Apollo 8 style, with the option to orbit around the moon several times before coming back. What you're thinking of is the mission to retrieve the robotic mission that retrieved a small near-Earth asteroid, and then humans going to that. That mission is an official mission that they are spending money on, but that hasn't officially been put on the books. You know, I'm thinking that's like Exploration Mission 3 or 4 or whatever, but that's not number 2.
You know, I put $1 on the table right now that says that will be canceled with the next president that comes into office, who will then, and this part of the problem is every time you get a new president, every 8 years, the focus of NASA shifts, and no one can seem to say, this is what we're going to do. It's always like, well, I don't really like those moving here. Well, I don't really
in my opinion, that is why NASA and subcontractors should have motivation. You know, that is their 10-year deadline, you know, to get to the moon before the end of the decade. We got to finish our project before the end of the administration, otherwise it'll get canceled, like so many others.
Well, you get a little bit of like that tenure, right? So one administration is 8 years, but if you're 8 years in, and
you have 4 to 8 years.
If you're just about ready to fly in that 8 years, you probably can sneak 2 more years out of it. So you could probably go a full decade. But really, Apollo happened in what, 8 years itself? Apollo didn't take the full decade. 9 years. Yeah. So we went from nothing.
Wasn't it officially announced in 1961 that we would actually do that right after the first manned flight?
And we went from nothing. We had like, our rockets didn't work kind of thing to humans on the moon in 9 years. And while it was a very specific political climate, we can, as humanity, do that again. Yeah, I haven't let you talk really at all. I'm sorry. Did you have anything?
What do you think, Carrie Ann?
No, I'm good.
You agree? Makes you sad?
This segment's long enough. It's fine. We can talk about it after dark.
All right, cool, awesome. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, comments from our last show. Comments from your last show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
We've always looked to the stars. They guide us, give us comfort, help us find our way. We see ourselves out there. When we look up, it inspires us. And we long for something we don't yet know. We yearn to go there. So, we venture forth.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not.
Many think we stopped exploring. But we know our journey didn't end. We've only just begun.
Orion is functioning perfectly at this point.
Come with us and explore tomorrow.
Actually, I think it was a really good commercial choice by Dutta after the everything's depressing, nothing's going to work, and just kind of remembering, actually, no, the future is very bright. It's a really cool place we're going. And it's also really neat that we can argue these things in a public forum like this. And, you know, all we're really trying to do is the betterment of humanity and get people excited about space. And there are some depressing things with the Space Launch System, but there's some really, really exciting things with it as well as other programs. Also. All right, let's go ahead and thank all of our patrons who've helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. These are Patreon Plus subscribers. Everyone on this list is going to get access to After Dark as soon as it is available, and they've contributed $2.50 or more to this specific episode. But wait, there's more! We also have our Patreon subscribers. These are people who've contributed as little as 1 penny up to $2.49. So 1 penny gets your name in the show. And we have reward levels all the way up to $10, and I think I've never gone past $10, but yeah, up to $10. So if you'd like more information, you can find that information over at patreon.com/TMRO. All right, let's go ahead and get started with some comments from last week's show. I'm wondering if, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. Hi, Mike. Kevin's up first. Here we go. Boom.
This comment comes off of YouTube. Said by a show who uses an acronym as a name sounds like tomorrow. Your point is good, though, and the elimination of acronyms should be acted upon in all technical and governmental agencies.
Technically, TMRO is not an acronym.
No, it's considered to be an initialism, which is often confused for an acronym. The definition of initialism, in case you're wondering, is a set of initials representing a name, organization, or the like, which each letter is pronounced separately, or we've decided to pronounce them all together. But as you have noticed, Ben has called us tomorrow TMRO, much like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, usually referred to as the FBI.
Well, FBI is an acronym.
No, it's an initialism.
But the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Okay, anyway, that's the point.
Okay, so there you go. Anyhow, we're not an acronym. TMRO does not stand for
anything.
This moose really organic or anything similar. Okay, now in the comments section, I would like you to tell me what you think TMRO should stand for if it were an acronym. I think that would be a lot of fun. So come up with different acronyms for TMRO.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just shorthand for trying to say tomorrow because I can't use tomorrow. All right. Next up, Stephen?
Yes, also off of YouTube. In my formative years, I enjoyed knowing that MECO, main engine cutoff, and TLI, which I had actually never personally heard before, translunar injection, meant. Those are things that quote-unquote normies wouldn't know. The one thing I have to keep in mind is that each group or culture will develop its own lingo. Pop to some is soda to others. To cut down on any snobbish actions towards the outside group, a general don't be a dick policy would probably be better than a basic no acronym policy.
Yeah, and actually I think we say don't use acronyms because I think that's the biggest offender, but at the end of the day it really shouldn't be a don't be a dick or don't use acronyms policy, but really speak in a way in which someone who's not familiar with the industry can understand you.
Yeah.
So, and that actually includes other terminology as well, which actually I think will hit a little bit. It's
another, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, speak in a way that, especially, so for a show like this, it makes a lot of sense. Dada.
So there's a perfect example. MECO, which is MECO, you pronounce it MECO, that is an acronym. TLI, which you spell out the letters, is an initialism.
Thank you.
So TMRO is not an acronym, it's an initialism.
TL, translunar. Federal Bureau of, no, but Federal Bureau of Investigation.
It's not that the letters means, has nothing to do with that.
You don't say FIBI.
You don't,
you
right,
say
thank
FBI.
You say FBI.
You're spelling out the letters, so that's
sunk in.
Thank you. So I literally looked up the definitions.
Oh my God.
Difference with us is being initialism that doesn't
Thank
mean
you.
anything.
Thank you. You know what? Double palm face on that one. You get a number 1 and a number 2 palm face. Thank you. We're all palm facing, honestly. Goodness.
The collective internet just sighed at me. Yes, so just communicate in a way in which people can understand.
My favorite variation of that idea is the XKCD came out with an explanation for, I forget which rocket it was, but it was, in plain
Goer Upper
English.
5?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the
Goer
Saturn
Upper 5.
V.
Thank you, the Saturn V. I knew I was going to say Atlas 5, which is why I just backed away from it. But yeah, the Upgoer 5, and explained all of the different things, but in the most plain English possible. I think it was actually something along the lines of taking words out of the 500 most common words used in the English language or something along those lines.
Which actually is still not what I'm saying, because that I thought was in certain areas very hard to understand.
Sure, but the concept is still there, is that, anything should be able to be explained in very common verbiage.
Yes, common language. Yeah, yeah, there you go. Next up.
Okay. Next one comes from Big John 697791 off of YouTube as well. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
You're welcome. Next up.
Every day's a school day and all that. However, BST is British Summertime, not British Standard Time.
Yes, and I'm embarrassed that I screwed up a time zone. I don't do that. So you are correct. BST is British Summertime, not British Standard Time. Yep.
Yep.
Next up.
It comes from Glander Broder from YouTube. This is also the idea of jargon that seeps into discussions of spaceflight. You have specific impulse, delta V, is that an acronym? Hill sphere, Lagrangian point, and other things that show up from time to time in discussions of spaceflight that could also confuse people.
Which gets tricky, right? So you have to know your audience. For us, anytime we hit something like a Lagrange point, you'll notice we stop and kind of explain. A Lagrange point is kind of that point in between two gravity bodies where they're pulling on each other, so you kind of get stuck in between the two and don't really need any fuel to actually stay in that specific point. A Lagrange point, there you go.
Is it Lagrange or is it Lagrange? I never was clear on that.
I've always heard it as Lagrange, but I could be wrong. Internet, comment, how do you pronounce it? Lagrange or Lagrange? So there you go.
I think it's more like an often thing.
Delta V is another one. The amount of speed difference, I guess, would be the
delta V is not something.
Velocity difference.
Velocity difference. There you go. The difference in velocity required to do something. So The delta V between suborbital and orbital would be almost 10,000 miles an hour, not quite 10,000 miles an hour, right? 17,000. No, but the difference between suborbital and orbital.
Suborbital, you can go straight up and straight down with no speed whatsoever.
Okay, well, a traditional suborbital flight is around 6,500 miles an hour. A 5-minute suborbital flight. You don't have a velocity of 0.
It depends on which direction your velocity is headed as well, because you can do 17,500 miles per hour straight up, and you're not orbiting.
Okay, that's fair too. So how do I describe delta V then?
Well, velocity is a speed and direction. Your delta,
it's a change.
Your delta V is the difference in velocity from A and B.
As the chat room is pointing out, some of these things are not jargon per se, in so much as they are scientific terms that they.
Yeah, but how do you
describe that? How do you explain
these
that?
in a easy to consume way?
Yeah, delta V was one that really took me a very long time to understand, and I'm not even completely sure that I do understand. And it's taken me a lot of context clues and a lot of just sort of smiling and nodding.
If I'm sitting still, my velocity is 0.
Yes.
And if I stand up and I start walking at 3 miles an hour to the north, my delta V is plus 3 miles per hour to the north.
Right. Heldesk is saying delta V is essentially change in velocity.
Yes.
V being velocity. So yeah, that's going to come with any industry, anything you're talking about in any way, shape, or form. For those of you who hate Disney, I apologize, but it actually is a great example for anyone who has never been to any sort of theme park ever. And there are people out there. It's so difficult to describe what it means, what it's like to step into this completely theme from top to bottom, all other world, until you do it, or until you see pictures, or until you see video of it, or until... And there are just things that are like that. You can't describe salmon to someone who's allergic to fish and has never had fish before. It's just something you need to experience, or something you need to somehow touch, feel, sense, anything along those lines. And unfortunately, some of these terms are like that.
Yes, but for the terms that aren't like that, that can be easily explained,
then
you should do your best to easily explain it,
them.
because the whole point of what we're trying to do is to get the world excited about going to the cosmos, and in order to do that, you have to be approachable. In order to do that, you cannot use acronyms. Acronyms are the easy one to point at, but you also can't use necessarily industry-specific terms for absolutely everything, or just assume that everyone knows industry-specific terms. That's not to say that you have to speak to everyone like they're a 5th grader, but at least kind of use context clues with whoever you're speaking at, and if they do give you that blank stare, maybe back up and help them out a little bit and offer to help them out without making them feel like an idiot. I guess that's really what this comes down to, is knowing who you're communicating with and what you can do. For example, our rundowns are littered with acronyms.
Oh, yeah, they're awful.
But they can be. They can be, because they're for us and only for us. Yeah. And when we then regurgitate them to you, I don't say SLC 36, I say Space Launch Complex 36, even though on my rundown it says SLC 36. All right, there you go. I've beaten that dead horse, and then I've beaten it again, and then I beat it a few more times.
A little bit.
Everyone was fast forwarding through that segment. Next up.
This one comes from I am Infidel off of Reddit. Is SpaceX not an acronym?
It is not an acronym.
Or is not SpaceX an acronym? I apologize. I completely just messed up that
SpaceX is not an acronym. SpaceX is a contraction.
Yeah, so SpaceX stands for Space Exploration Technologies Corporation. When you're using a name or term formed from the initial letters of a group of words pronounced as a separate word, like NATO, which stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's an acronym. However, the Space Exploration Technologies Corporation is being contracted into SpaceX. Otherwise, it would be known as the SETC, or SECT.
So here and after, you refer to SpaceX as SECT.
Sure. Why not? That'll be fun.
Can I just call them SET? Just SET? S-E-T? Space Exploration
Technically, corporation is part of their official title. If you're, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it right. You wouldn't call NASA just NAS. Just because administration just, doesn't feel like...
Challenge, Space
right?
Nerds. You are hereby challenged to refer to SpaceX now as sect, and NASA is NAS.
There you
All
go.
right. You're welcome, Internet.
Jax is now Jax, and I suppose Issa could be Is.
East.
Or S.
All right, and finally...
Comes from the eccentric engineer off of Twitter. Says, tomorrow acronyms should be for contacts, nothing else. It just confuses the new hires.
Oh man, I'm not even sure it should be in contracts. If you ever look at like, we'll sign, like we're working with broadband.
Contacts, not contracts. Contacts.
Whatever.
Okay, just saying.
For contacts. I think you meant contracts.
Okay, sure. You can assume that person meant something that they didn't.
Like doctor?
Yo no say. It just says contacts, not contracts.
Well, I didn't understand the question to begin with, so we're going to go ahead and end the show on that particular note. After Dark is up next. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching, and we will see you next week.